Now we have seen that different organisms respire by different respiratory organs. So we say that there can be different types of respiration. There can be different types of respiration depending upon the different respiratory organs. So we can have the cuticular respiration. There is one cuticular respiration in which the organism make use of the cuticle, that is the skin, for respiring. There can be a branchial respiration where the organism make use of its gills to respire. It can be tracheal respiration in which the organism make use of trachea to respire, just the trachea. And there can be a pulmonary respiration where the organism make use of lungs, or it has special organs, lungs, for respire. So we have different kind of respiration depending upon the respiratory organ. So we can have the cuticular if it is skin, we can have the branchial if it is gills, we can have the tracheal if it is trachea, we can have the pulmonary as if we have the lungs. So as you have seen that there are different kinds of respiratory organs which can actually serve the function for the respiration. So that means they must be possessing some different features, that is what they make them as the efficient respiratory organs. So what are the characteristics of the respiratory organ? What are the characteristics of the respiratory organ? One is that it should have thin membrane. It should have thin membrane. Second is that its surface should be moist. Its surface should be moist, because whenever the surface is moist, so gases exchange can be faster, because diffusion of gases is faster in a moist medium, right? So the surface should be moist. Third, the surface of respiratory organ should be large, should have large surface area, because more is the surface area, obviously more diffusion is going to be there. And the last is that it should be highly vascular. Now what does it mean vascular? It means large amount of blood supply should be there. Large amount of blood supply should be there. Now we are going to discuss these factors, and one more factor, it should be permeable to gases. See, if the respiratory organ is going to have a thin membrane, suppose it has a thin membrane and here it is going to have a thick membrane. So out of it, what do you think that where the diffusion of gases can be faster? Obviously in the thin one. So that is what the respiratory organ should possess, the thin membrane. Second is that their surface should be moist, because we know that when the surface is moist, the gases exchange, the diffusion becomes more faster. Third, it should have large surface area. Suppose the surface area for respiratory organ is this, and in another it is this. So out of it, where the diffusion is going to be faster? Obviously in the large surface area. And next, it should be highly vascular. There should be a large blood supply, because we know that the blood is the one factor because we know that, see, diffusion is the movement of anything from higher concentration to lower concentration, right? So we need that there should be certain thing inside the surface which can readily take up the gas and moves away, creating a less concentration, so that more and more gas can come into it, and likewise more and more gas can go out of it. So that means we need a blood there, because blood is a factor which contain the hemoglobin, which is going to take up the oxygen, or which is going to take bring the carbon dioxide here. So it should be highly vascular, because it is the one which is going to create the low concentration for the oxygen inside the body, and which is going to create the high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the body. So that means it should be highly vascular. That means large number of blood capillaries with the blood should be there, and it should be permeable. Because the one factor is that if the surface is not permeable means if it doesn't allow anything to go inside, then how the gases exchange is going to take place, right? So that means obviously the permeability is very important. Permeability to gases is very important. So these are the 5 factors which are the characteristics of the respiratory organs, and these characters are fulfilled by these organs. That is why they are acting as a, skin is acting as a organ for the respiration in many organisms. Gills is acting as a respiratory organ and so and so. So that means these all organs are efficient because they are possessing these 5 features. We are not talking that out of them which is the most efficient one. We are not talking this, keep in mind. I am just talking that the respiratory organ, the one which acts as a respiratory organ should possess these 5 characteristics, then only it is going to act as a good respiratory organ, otherwise it is not going to, or it is not going to show any kind of respiration because there won't be any diffusion of gases. So this is what are the different respiratory organs and characteristics of the respiratory organs. So now we are starting with the human respiratory system. We are starting with the human respiratory system. So the first thing is that we need to concentrate on the respiratory tract of the man. So this is the respiratory tract of the humans or a man, you can say. See what are the organs which comprise the respiratory tract. Then I will just explain you again. So I am just naming the labels. First we have is the nostrils. You know that we have a pair of nostrils by which we communicate with the outside world. Inner to it we have this bone, right. This is the bone which separate 2 cavities. This bone. This is a nasal septum. This is the nasal septum. See, anything inside your body which divides the a big cavity into 2 is called as septum. So here it is dividing the nasal cavity, therefore it is called as nasal septum. And on the either side we have the nasal cavity. You know that your nose is hollow from inside, that means it has the space this side also and this side also. This is the nasal cavity. So I think you got it. Nostrils, nasal septum, and inside these cavities are nasal cavity. So what you see inside is that in the nasal cavity, in this portion, we have hairs and we have mucus glands. We have hairs and mucus glands. These mucus glands actually secrete a slippery fluid that is called as mucus. And you know that they are very important, they are serving a very important function because both of them, what they do actually, they filter, they clean and they moist the air we inhale, and that is very much important for the diffusion. So the hairs and mucus gland are present in the nasal cavity. Mucus glands secrete mucus, hairs actually try to filter the air. So both of them are just performing the function. They are cleaning the air which we are inhaling, they are filtering the air so that nothing get inside the along with the air when you inhale, and they are making the air moist, which I told you is very important for the diffusion, because if the air is going to be moist, it is going to diffuse faster. Right. So this is what is a nostril, nasal septum, nasal cavity, and hair and mucus gland you already know. Now after that, like behind your nose you have a tube like structure that is called as pharynx. And this pharynx tube extends below behind the mouth also, because sometimes you feel that like when you have a when you breathe in or something like that, you feel this, that your nose and mouth are actually connected to each other. So you are right, they are actually connected to each other, and the tube that connects the both is the pharynx. So the tube which is after the nose is said to be nasopharynx, and the one which is behind the mouth is said to be oropharynx. And if we talk of the total tube, that is called as pharynx. So outer part is called as nasopharynx, which is behind the nose, and the other one is the oropharynx, which is behind the buccal cavity. Buccal cavity means your mouth. So the whole tube, you can also call it as pharynx also. This pharynx is a tube which get extend into a larynx. You know that this is a larynx. You have a you can say a bulge structure from here, from which the sound is produced. So this larynx is actually a sound producing box in your. And in the men, it is a prominent feature of the sexuality. We know that it is called as Adam's apple in the men, because it is a prominent sexual features which determines that the puberty is being achieved. So this is what is in larynx, but here we are not talking of the puberty factors, that we will talk in the reproduction, but here what we are considering is the tract, the organs which are lined up in the tract. So I think you got it. It is a pharynx which extend into a larynx, that is the voice box. Then we have a trachea. Trachea is performing a very important function, and you know that the other name for the trachea is the windpipe. And you have seen that in whole of the figure, it is the portion of the trachea where I have made these lines. These lines are actually indicating the cartilaginous rings. These lines are indicating the actually the cartilaginous rings, and these are very important. You know that what is the function of these cartilaginous rings? You know that when there is no air, suppose you try to hold your breath, right? So what happens? You don't die, because there is a fraction of time which you can actually bear without respiration, and you don't die. This is just because of the cartilaginous rings. And moreover, you have seen that if somebody tries to if somebody tries to kill someone by just by holding his you can say the neck. So this is what is the trachea which get collapsed actually, and due to which the death of the person occur. So there is like in a normal situation what we have in the trachea, the tracheal wall has a cartilaginous rings. And what are these rings doing for the trachea? They are keeping the trachea stiff. Right, like if there is no air, it is just making the trachea hold like this way, so that the tracheal wall does not collapse. Because if there is no air and if there are no rings, so there might be a chance that the tracheal wall may collapse. And if the tracheal wall will collapse, then you won't be able to respire, and the one person will immediately die. So that is why we have a cartilaginous rings which keeps the tracheal wall stiff, so that it doesn't collapse when there is no air. So you get a question like this for 2 marks. It's very important that why tracheal wall doesn't collapse. So you say that the tracheal wall doesn't collapse because it has a cartilaginous rings in it which may keep the trachea stiff like it is present, so that it doesn't collapse. So this is the reason that the presence of cartilaginous rings in the trachea, that is just preventing its collapse. So this is what is a trachea. Then you see that trachea divides into 2 branches which are entering into 2 lungs. These are the lungs which are located in the thoracic cavity. So they are dividing into 2 branches, and each branch is called as bronchi. Each branch is called as bronchi. Bronchi enter into 2 different lungs. As you all know, we have 2 lungs. So it enters into 2 lungs, and you know that our left side lung is little smaller because it has a notch-like structure to accommodate an heart. That will be taking up in a circulatory system, but here we are just going to consider this. So left lung is smaller, slightly smaller than the right lung. The reason behind it is accommodating a heart inside it. And we see that the trachea divides into 2 branches, that is bronchi. Bronchi is entering into 2 different lungs. Bronchi divides further. The first branch, like suppose it is bronchi, the first branch which arises from bronchi is primary bronchi. The another branch which arises from it is a secondary bronchi. The other which arises is a tertiary bronchi. The further a small branch of bronchi, that is bronchiole, which end up into a sac-like structure, that is the alveoli. That is the alveoli. And the other name for the alveoli is air sacs. This is the air sac. This is what is the division which we get inside the lungs. And you know that what is the outer covering of the lungs, which is very important. You get this question for 1 mark. It is the pleura. It is the pleura. So pleura is the outer membrane of the lungs, that is the covering of the lungs is the pleura. And where these lungs are located? These lungs are located in the thoracic cavity. Now what is the thoracic cavity? Like if you if you get a sample to see that there is in a chest there is a thoracic cavity, and how it is formed? It is formed like from an outer portion. It is formed like, or you can say from a front portion. It is formed of ribs which are held by a mid bone which is called as breastbone, or which is called as sternum. And behind we have a backbone like this. It is present like this actually, right? We have a backbone also, and lower side we have an abdomen. I'll draw a thoracic cavity. See, we have ribs on the front side. They are held by the bone which is called as sternum or the breastbone. Back side we have a backbone. You know that it is a stiff one. And lower side we have this kind of structure which is called as diaphragm. And lower side, like below this, we have a abdomen. So this whole thing is a cage-like structure, and in this cage-like structure is called as thoracic cavity, and in this cavity these lungs are located. So this is what is a respiratory tract, and moreover you know that when the child is born, if you compare the lungs of a newly born baby with an adult, so you will see that the one which is newly born has a very light pinkish kind of lungs, but if you see about the lungs for an adult, it is just like a, you can say, a dark cherry color. This is just because of the air pollution which we come across in a daily routine. So due to accumulation of those pollutants, the color of the lungs changes. So the color of the lung for a newly born is a light pinkish, a very good one. And if we talk about of the one who's of 80 or 90 years, it is just kind of a dark black cherry color red, just because of the pollutant. So see how much pollutant you come across in a daily routine. So this is what is a respiratory tract. I think you got it. Again, I'm just explaining it in a short while. Nostrils, nasal cavity, septum, nasopharynx, oropharynx, sound producing organ larynx, trachea. You know that a very important thing, it has a cartilaginous rings to prevent its collapse when there is no air. Bronchi, first branch primary bronchi, another secondary, tertiary, bronchiole, and then alveoli. Alveoli is also called as an air sac, and see, alveoli is performing a very important function. There are a lot of alveoli which are present here, like this, numerous alveoli which are being present here. And if we see it, if we look for the alveoli, we see that alveoli is something like this, surrounded by a tuft of capillaries. Because this everything is going to act as a track, just a track for the oxygen, a passage for the oxygen. But this is going to act as a respiratory organ from which the oxygen is going to enter into the blood, and CO2 from blood is going to enter into the alveoli. So you may get a question, this also for 1 mark. Name the respiratory organ through which actual exchange of gases take place. That is the alveoli. That is the alveoli. So our real respiratory organ is the alveoli. All the things which are involved in this is just constituting a respiratory tract. And I think you got it, that the function for the hair and mucus gland also, these are very important. They filter, moist, and clean the air we inhale. So this is what is the respiratory tract of the man. Now we are taking up the mechanism of the breathing and followed by the cellular respiration.